Mind your business, Ramana Maharshi said. Ramana Maharshi was a great Indian realized sage, died in 1950, taught mostly by silence, but when he spoke, he ran this, well, he didn't run, an ashram grew up around him, and he had no interest in receiving disciples or organizing anything, but he was very attentive, very mindful, very compassionate to everybody who came. So he was always insisted on eating everything that they ate, and was concerned that when guests arrived that they should be, fed immediately, and always insisted on being available to everybody, just to sit there, even on the day of his death. But he wasn't a kind of an institution. He was just himself. But he used to, one of his remarks, and he had a sort of a very shrewd and very observant eye and a sense of humor. He used to say, they come here to the ashram looking for enlightenment. After 2 weeks, they get caught up in ashram politics. And this was one of his sayings. He said, mind your business, to the people living there. It's a good, I thought we might take this for our motto next year. Mind your business. Take care of what you came here for. Find the I first, and you may afterwards speak of other matters. So it's a good reminder, as we come to the last lap of the retreat, just to remember that, recall that. Like on all journeys, the first half of the journey you're looking back, and then the second half of the journey you're looking forward to your destination and wondering what you're going to be doing next. But I think the purpose of a retreat is to try to remain as much as possible, and it takes time to get there, to stay in that place where you can look equally backwards and forwards, and actually you're simply seeing in the moment. You're not looking back, in a sense, or looking forward, but you're seeing in the present. There's a difference between looking at something or someone in a way that you objectify it and distance it from yourself. There's a difference between that and seeing. We see God. Jesus said, happy are the pure of heart, for they shall see God. But that's different from looking at God, which is what we do in these talks. No, what we are usually thinking. Usually what we're doing when we're thinking about God. So some of the rather superficial things I was referring to about the brain can help us, I think, to be aware of our own ways of looking or seeing or being. Mindfulness, being aware of yourself in the present moment, being aware of what you're doing, is the first step. But mindfulness by itself is kind of neutral. The American military is teaching mindfulness to its military, to its staff. Well, there's only one reason for that. So a sniper could be very mindful, could be paying attention, could be really focused, single-minded. It's not quite the same kind of quality of human being that we see in Ramana Maharshi, or that we see in ourselves in those times where we can see another with compassion and be present to them in a loving way. So we need to see the difference. And perhaps part of that difference is reflected in the argument or the discussion, which doesn't go anywhere at the moment, among scientists about the brain and the mind. There are no definitions of what these mean in relationship to each other. Nobody knows what the mind is, or if there is such a thing, separate from the brain. The scientist I've been referring to occasionally, Ian McGilchrist, simply says, and recognizing that it's not really very definitive, but he says maybe you could say the mind is the brain's experience of itself. But experience is very difficult to define. What do we mean by experience? John Main tells us in meditation not to look for any experiences. He says nothing happens in meditation, which is not designed to sell meditation on the mass market. But it is true to the great tradition. So nothing happens in meditation, and then he says, interestingly, if anything does happen, ignore it. It doesn't say deny it, he just says ignore it in the sense of being detached from it, not try, if it was a good experience, you have a blissful meditation, don't try and repeat it. Don't keep on thinking about it. Let go of it. You're on a journey. And if you have a period of time where your meditation is really hard going and the road seems narrow and the way to life seems hard, then we'll just keep going. Sometimes it's like sitting in a car on a highway in a rainstorm, as I was actually when we were driving up from Rome, and all the cars have to slow down. And if it weren't for the windshield wipers, we would have had to have stopped, of course. But because the windshield wipers were working flat out, we were able to just keep moving slowly until the storm passed. So in our meditation, the windshield wipers are like the mantra, just keeping the distractions relatively clear until you break through into sunshine again. So keep going, as John Cassian said in the 4th century, talking about the mantra. He said, say the mantra in prosperity and in adversity. In prosperity, in adversity, in sunshine and in rain. That's a simple, consistent, faithful teaching, but at the same time, it has an absolute quality to it. Now, of course, as John Main would say, you do the best you can. But doing the best you can in all circumstances is the best way to handle the experience of failure. Failure is inevitable, it's endemic. As I said before, in any learning that we do, we will have to fail. Otherwise, you're not learning. It's inevitable. However, the way you see the failure and respond to it, deal with it, is the all-important thing. And that's true of pretty well everything in life. From our relationships, sometimes we fail in our relationships, or in our body, our health. Sometimes organs fail, and sometimes in our jobs, our work, we don't achieve results or meet targets, we fail. Somebody else is more successful than we are. So failure is, of course, inevitable, but how we see it, respond to it, and deal with it is all important. One of the most, I think, probably the most successful hedge fund manager in the world is a man called Ray Dalio, who's a meditator. And Ray, non-religious, like Lee Kuan Yew. And he, of course, is a kind of a role model and an icon for aspiring investors, investment bankers. And I refer to him in this MBA course I give. And his insight is to do with failure. He says, failure, he's not a philosopher. Well, he is a kind of philosopher in his way. A philosopher born of experience and a good mind and great capacity for attention. But he says, experience, learning and success comes through how we handle and learn from failure. He also was once giving a talk on meditation at Georgetown, and he was describing in a rather sort of casual way in a way, but he was describing meditation, and he said, I sit down, and he said, I start to say the mantra, and then I get great ideas. Just really, because meditation, he knows all about the brain, and the effects that meditation has on the brain, and he's read about how meditation develops creativity and fresh thinking and new perspectives. So he said, I get these great ideas during the meditation. And I thought, oh dear. But I didn't have to worry, because the next thing he says, oh, but I've got to let them go. You've got to let them go. And go back to the mantra. Keep going back to the mantra. Well, he understood more about contemplation than a great many theologians or religious people. He's understood that fundamental and radical poverty of spirit that is involved in the work of contemplation. So, as I say, experience is difficult to define. We're not looking for experiences in the meditation period itself. If something happens, we just accept it and deal with it and move on, keep moving on. And that's why meditation, I don't think meditation is ever boring. Some people say, anybody here find it boring sometimes to meditate? You do? Okay. How long have you been meditating, if you don't mind me asking? 10 years. And you find it always boring?
Not always, but quite often.
Really? Anybody else find it boring? I mean, it depends what you mean by the word boring. Sometimes it's not particularly interesting, but...
When you are not present, it is boring.
When what?
When you are not present, it becomes boring.
When you're not present, it becomes boring, yeah. I've always felt that's why I was saying the other day, if you're yawning all the way through the meditation, I would do something about it. Stand on your head or read a book or I mean, I don't mean avoid the meditation, but think about why you're yawning during the meditation. Because you may be very tired, you may even fall asleep in meditation. Anyway, think about it. As I say, it's difficult to put these things into words, and it's not about judging a person. And sometimes we use words like boring or experience in different ways and with different meanings. So, anyway, we're not looking for an experience to happen in the meditation. And if something happens, we just let go of it and move on. But there clearly is a reason for meditating. Nobody meditates simply because there's nothing else to do. You have to make quite a deliberate and sustained act of faith in the work, the meaning, the practice of meditation in order to enter into this learning process and stay with it. So there's a reason for doing it. The reason is, even though again it may be difficult to put into words, the reason is an experience. But it's not an experience so much as the way experience itself becomes conscious, the way we become aware and are able to see with a different kind of perception, a different quality of being. The fundamental problem, according to McGilchrist, in explaining the experience of consciousness is that there's nothing else remotely like it to compare it with. How can we compare consciousness with anything else? Consciousness is the ground of all experience. We wouldn't be here, we wouldn't be present if it weren't for it. Nothing has the uniqueness involved in consciousness. And that's very similar to saying, as Saint Irenaeus said, that we can never know God as an object. We can never know God as an object. We can only know God by sharing in God's own self-knowledge. It's a fundamental Christian principle about the meaning of God, and if we got that fundamental principle right, we wouldn't be arguing about the existence of God in the way people still do, at least the English people like, what's his name, Hitchens and people like that, still arguing about, do you believe in God? So if we approach the meaning of God from the mystical perspective rather than the dogmatic, scholastic, intellectual perspective, then it becomes much easier to have a conversation, a dialogue, and to listen to different perspectives on the subject, in the same way that we would be able to have this conversation with Buddhists. You can have a better conversation with a Buddhist about God from this mystical perspective of God, rather than with a fundamentalist Christian who believes in God, but believes in God as an object that we can speak about, and God who wants us to do this and doesn't want us to do that, and so on, and makes no distinction between the cultural and intellectual image of God and what might be the actual mystery, reality of God. And I think, just to come back to the poem, I think this is through the very simple, sort of rather haunting dialogue of this poem on love. And remember, it's called Love, and it is about a conversation or a relationship with love. In the very simple language and simple tone of this poem, we are actually introduced to a very subtle, a very deep experience of God and the self. The poem is framed as a dialogue, and dialogues are more left brain, because a dialogue means there's me here, you there, two objects, two centers of consciousness exchanging information, ideas, perspectives, opinions, and so on. But that's, of course, how we communicate. That's how metaphors work. And we need this language and this way of thinking and expressing ourselves in order to try to point towards a deeper experience of non-duality. So although there is this dialogue taking place between love and the poet's self, and probably as we saw yesterday, it's the poet's ego that is resisting the seductive movement of love that won't, as we'll see now, won't give up. Nevertheless, it's what is being pointed to is another level of relationship, another experience of self that cannot be achieved as long as the poet remains in this ego-centered and resistant and objectifying place. So what we're hearing here is quite a big struggle going on. And although the words are gentle and the tone is somehow intriguing and reassuring, and love is being faithful, we shouldn't underestimate the real existential death that is taking place in the soul of the poet, as the I, as the ego I, anyway, of the poet is meeting its match, meeting its maker. Okay, so let's just look at the next verse. Anybody like to read, to recite the first verse? Thank you. We'll do it. Do the first two, first and second verse.
Love bade me welcome, yet my soul drew back, guilty of dust and sin. The quick-eyed love, observing me grow slack from my first entrance in, drew nearer to me, sweetly questioning if I lacked anything. A guest, I answered, worthy to be here. Love said, you shall be he. I, the unkind, ungrateful. Oh, my dear, I cannot look on thee. Love took my hand, and smiling did reply, who made the eyes but I?
Thank you. So we finished yesterday with love, with Herbert drawing back from this some kind of experience or movement of love. We don't know exactly what it was. Was it a person that he fell in love with? Was it an interior experience in prayer that awakened in him? We don't actually know. All we know is that it is love, and love can come through many doors and take many forms. Anyway, he had some kind of encounter with love, and immediately his soul drew back with this feeling of existential failure, of guilt and sin, of dust and sin, which produced this experience of guilt. But love, being very observant and quick to observe, seeing that he was withdrawing and sort of shriveling back from the very first encounter, the first step from my first entrance in, love draws nearer to him. Love gets stronger, more present, but in a sweet way, not overpowering, not offensive. Not, it's not like it isn't as if God was stalking him, although some poets say that, the hound of heaven. But anyway, sweetly questioning, do you lack anything? Is there something you need? It's quite a surprising question. Remember, He didn't say, what's the matter? Or why are you frightened or something? It's a question that goes more quickly and more directly to the problem, to the point of this withdrawing, this guilt. What do you lack? Okay. Then he replies, a guest.
I have a problem with the semantics there.
Yes?
How can you lack a guest?
Ah, well, yes, it's interesting. The question is, it's a question of semantics or grammar, really. Do you lack anything? And, well, I think this is an important one, because he says, yes, I lack a guest. So he's being smart. He's being a bit of a smart aleck. You know the story of the rich young man who comes to see Jesus and says, good teacher, what must I do to inherit eternal life? And Jesus sort of turns the tables on him and says, why do you call me good? Only God is good. And you see in that little dialogue between Jesus and the rich young man, I mean, it all seems to me that the self-satisfied ego of the rich young man is dismantled. The tables are turned. And the rich young man then gets to the point very quickly where he is speaking now from a point of sincerity and also of weakness, of failure, because he fails to respond to the invitation of Jesus to follow him. Nevertheless, at least he's in a more real place than he was before. His ego has been knocked off his pedestal. So I think, I don't know what you feel, but I think that's the little tone I get in this dialogue, is that Herbert, the ego of Herbert, is speaking to love in this smart way. So what? In fact, it's evasive. It's evasive, isn't it?
So isn't there another way to see it, that
Go on.
the narrator is so ashamed of himself and his guilt that he almost wishes there were another person there rather than himself.
Okay, very good.
He's not really being smart. He's actually
Yeah.
it's further admitting of his sense of worthlessness. I can't be here, but there should be someone else.
Good. Okay, sure. That's yes. Okay, so there. Something he needs. Yes. So this is what he lacks, is the ability to be there as a guest should, who is being welcomed by love. So yes, I mean, I think it's so simple, this exchange, and yet what's so brilliant about it is that it offers so many different shades or aspects of shades of grey. You know, I mean, shades of the ego, really. Sorry.
Would he be ready to go from being guilty into a confession so quickly?
Well, so that's another point. Is he actually? How much of this is humble? Is he being humble? Is he saying, I can't do it? He is in a way, yes. Could say that. I think there are many, you know, if I'm right in saying this is the ego responding, the self-defensive, fearful ego, then whenever we're acting in the ego, it's difficult to define us sometimes. We have so many different acts, so many different personas working. But I mean, I think you can interpret this as you think. Yes? Sorry.
I was just going to say, if you look at the last two lines of the whole poem, doesn't that kind of suggest that it's George Herbert feelings about an encounter with Christ in the Eucharist, and that therefore the whole thing is his humility in the face of such love.
Okay, well, we'll come to that. But I think the poem is about the stages of this, of coming to that resolution. And he's not there yet. So how we read this response? A guest, worthy to be here. Is he being sincere? Is he being smart? He's being true, or he thinks he's being true, but he's actually being told in the next response of love that he's wrong, that isn't the way, that isn't an answer, that isn't an acceptable answer, or it's not an excuse. Okay, so he thinks he's saying, I can justify the fact that I withdraw from this invitation of love because I am not worthy to be here, non sum dignus. We say that at the before communion. I am not worthy to receive you, but we only say the word, and we shall be healed. So there is a confession of unworthiness, but it's not. It doesn't stay there. The unworthiness, expression of unworthiness, is linked to an appeal for grace. But he hasn't got to that point yet. He's just saying, I am not worthy, non sum dignus. And love says, well, he says, a guest, I lack a guest. Or there is a guest worthy for this invitation, lacking here. And what does love say? You shall be he. You shall be that guest. So it's pretty terse, isn't it? So he says, I'm not worthy, and there isn't anyone in me or anything in me worthy for this invitation. And love says, you shall be that guest. So it is you who are being invited. Then he comes back with his riposte. He doesn't say, oh, thank you. You really did mean me. I really didn't think you meant me. But he's still putting up a fight. He's resisting, and in that sense, he's rejecting. And he's, you might say, well, what do you say? He says, how can I be this guest because I am so unkind? What does the word unkind mean? Non gentile, yes. Not kind in that sense. It also has the sense of being almost unnatural, doesn't it? It's not, the unkind, the ungrateful. Why does he say unkind? Yes. Kind in the sense of kindred, not related. Not dedicated, not related even. Isn't it? When you're isolated in your ego and you're rejecting love, you are very alone. And you don't feel connected. You don't feel you've got any relatives out there in the cosmos or in the world. There are no meaningful connections for you. So, of course, you can't be kind, even in the ordinary sense of the word, courteous and respectful. And, you see in any big city every day, you'll find people who have gone out of their mind, standing on the street corner, shouting, screaming, angry at the world, hurling abuse. Everybody's walking around them, avoiding eye contact with them in case, these are the tragic. This is very similar to this, I think, in a way. Although this is more English and an Anglican, but it's it is coming out of a horrific place, a nightmare place of human existential aloneness. So and he's saying here, I am unkind, I am ungrateful, I am unworthy. What a thing to say about yourself at any time, but especially when love is trying to get its arms around you, and you're pushing it away. So it's a very deceptively sweet poem, really. So I, the unkind, the ungrateful, and then what about this next phrase? Ah, my dear, I cannot look on thee. What does that convey? Ah, my dear. This is the poet speaking to love. Ah, my dear. Yes. Well, it's, yes, in a way, yes.
It's very familiar. It suddenly becomes rather familiar, his breast now.
Yes.
Almost as you're moving from the divine to a human
Yeah.
interaction.
Yeah.
Thee is you.
Hmm?
Thee is a form for you.
Thee is you, yes. It's two. Thee is familiar, well, it's a familiar you. Yeah. Ah, my dear. I don't know, what are the occasions you say my dear to someone? This is very English, of course. So even the English even the English can't understand each other when they're speaking like this. So the English are masters at hiding their feelings, of course. So it's very difficult, even for the English, but so for the non-English speaking people, forgive the English speakers for trying to unravel this. But
Almost a little bit patronising, almost as if, oh, silly you, only you.
yes, yes, it is condescending, isn't it?
It's condescending.
Oh, my dear. Ah, my dear, come in, sit down. It's a certain tone. It is very English, but I don't know if there are corresponding phrases in Italian or in German or in.
Or is he just being coy and saying, well, really try and seduce me?
Well, maybe okay. That's you're letting him off the hook there. Good. Maybe he's sure. No, I mean, I don't. I don't think this is this kind of poem admits of different interpretations, which may not be, rather like, if you use the left and the right brain together, they can coexist. But the way I read this anyway is, my dear is like the rich young man who says, good master. And if you say to Jesus, good master, it depends on the tone of voice, it depends where it's coming from, and that's a question of interpretation, because we have to imagine it. But I read that, as you said, as distancing. It's a way of being polite, but pushing the other person away. Not allowing the intimacy that love is demanding and insisting on, not letting that intimacy work anymore, get any closer. It's killing. So I read it in a way. It's very cold. It's killing with politeness.
I can't think it's whether he doesn't want to fit in or he doesn't think he fits in.
Okay, so that's it. Does he? So what do you feel? I mean, when you're in this space, we have to try to. I suspect we've all been in that space at some point, and it's difficult to remember the contradictory feelings that motivate our actions or words. when we're in that space. On the one hand, you're appealing for help. On the other hand, you are doing everything you can to reject it.
I think he's saying that, but I think he means, or he's trying to convey that love, that person, shouldn't really look at him because the distance is too great.
Okay.
But he means that you can't really look at me because I'm just the one thing too far away.
Yes, I think it's as if there's a very deep handicap, and he has learnt to cover up the handicap. And what's the first question love asks? What do you lack? What's missing? What's missing in you? And his reply, a guest worthy to be here, doesn't really answer the question. In fact, as I said, it avoids the question cleverly.
He wants to be somebody else.
Yes, he thinks he should be somebody else. Yeah, which is actually being lost in the experience of failure, isn't it? It's a good definition of failure. I wish I was somebody else. Not only I wish I were somewhere else, but I wish I was another person.
Well, and it's also very self-conscious.
Yes.
I'm thinking when I've been caught up and the light is shining on me and I felt more self-conscious, all the words grate against each other. I can't imagine anyone reading this poem and reading that line well. Unkind, ungrateful, the words bang against each other. It's self-conscious and it's painful, and when it's happened to me, in the middle of it, I can feel I'm being a twit, or so it's got all these things jumbled together.
Yes.
Not just the clever, not just the evading, but also maybe in the middle of it, you're heartbroken that you can't believe you said such a stupid thing, or you're rejecting what you want.
Yeah.
And love is just other-centeredly welcoming, and your words are jumbled together.
I remember staying with a family once, and the a little boy, had got into a temper tantrum about something, and he didn't want. I think we were all going out somewhere, and this little boy was either didn't want to go, or there was some reason for it being in a tantrum. And so he ran into his room, and so we went in after him, because he was in tremendous pain, but really angry at the same time. And he was not responding, would not respond, to and they said, oh, come on, we'll have a nice time, we'll have an ice cream. He didn't want any of it. He was just locked into this self-reinforcing rage and pain, because he wasn't getting whatever it was he wanted. And then, it was a very strange moment. He took some drawings that he had been working on, which he was very proud of, and he threatened to tear them up. And they weren't very great drawings, but for him, they were, of course. There was something precious to him. And he wanted to destroy them. Why? To make his point, to hurt himself more, to hurt his family who were not giving him what he wanted. I don't know. Somehow there's an emotional logic in what he did, but it's difficult to give a single explanation of doing it. Anyway, on that happy note, let's go into. But let's just finish that verse, and then you can keep it in the back of your mind. Ah, my dear, I cannot look on thee. So he's found another way of saying, no, thank you, I'm afraid I can't come. Love now, what does love do? took my hand. So now there's physical contact. He's crossed the boundary. You know, you don't touch your client. So, well, you do if you're Giovanni, but so love takes love. It doesn't just touch him; it takes his hand, which is a leading, which is doing something. It's not just touch. Huh?
It's side by side. Interesting. Quick-eyed love is being looked at.
Yes.
That's where it starts being looked at. And now love is standing side by side. It's very different.
Okay. Yes, it's very different.
Love is determined.
Love is very determined. And you can almost, I think, this is so subtle, this poem, because you almost feel, when Vaughan Williams set this to music, it's a beautiful song made out of this, and probably Herbert wrote his poems to be sung. It seems very sweet. There is this wonderful faithfulness of love. And we'll look at this in terms of redemption in a minute, or later. But at the same time, and that's true, there is this description of love as faithful and enduring and so on, and taking the initiative. But at the same time, you feel what the poet feels. Leave me alone. You know, love takes his hand. Well, don't. Leave me alone. This is all he's saying, isn't it? Stay away from me. I'm not worthy. Now, whether that's... What?
This is almost what would, sorry, I'm not you. I feel that this is typical of anybody who feels maybe at communion that you have sinned, So this is not, you do fight, you do feel unworthy. You feel deeply unworthy. And I don't see here any of this stuff. I do understand when we talk about a child who is so deeply upset that they behave in that kind of way. But you can be at communion on your knees and you feel those words. I feel unworthy, I can't. And God is saying to you, but you will come and I will give you. I'm sorry, I've got a bit worked up about it because I don't think any of this is a 16th century, 17th century poem. And so when you use the word we, I had a friend once who was used to say we to me. I absolutely loved it because it was something hugely intimate. So for me, all of this is this is Christ talking to you and you talking back to him. There is a huge sense to be like this, but I can't let it. I can't listen to something that I don't agree. So I'm just telling you how I see it. That it's something that I think can happen to any of us in a moment of suddenly when the Eucharist is not just what we do on Sunday or whatever, suddenly it's something hugely real and you feel dusty and dirty.
And sinful. No, thank you. No, thank you very much. That was a very, very useful perspective, I think. And I think it shows what a powerful and true poem it is, because it does call for a very personal response and interpretation. And as I've said, there's more than one way of interpreting it, which will be where we're coming from, and what our own experience has been. And in a way, you could almost say this dialogue is an instant. It's not. It's touching into a process that we almost are not comfortable unpacking or analyzing too much, and it's easy to miss the whole meaning of it if you do analyze it too much. But anyway, thank you for saying that, because I think it was very useful. So anyway, we've got to the point where he is continuing to feel unworthy, and he thinks of himself as unkind, ungrateful, and he cannot even look on love now. So he's giving different reasons for the same fear, and in a way justifying the same feeling of unworthiness. And then love takes his hand and smiling. Remember what Simone Weil said about smiling yesterday? Smiling replied, "Who made the eyes but I?" So this is rather like God speaking to Job. At the end of the book of Job, after Job has been in this long dialogue and long struggling and wrestling with the meaning of suffering, and why has God treated him in this way, and so on, and the whole book of Job has been about this wrestling with the meaning of suffering and the suffering of the innocent. And then finally, so God listens to all of this. He said, "Now just shut up." He actually does say that. He says, "Shut up." And what do you know? He's saying, you don't know where any of this comes from. You don't know the world. You don't know how many stars there are. You don't look at the whole of creation. You know nothing. And suddenly the tables are turned, and from being this shrill voice of complaint, Job is humbled. Job becomes able to relate to God. And so I think in a way, there's a little toughness in what love is saying here, isn't it?
But I think the poet has been pleading.
Pleading.
Yeah, he's been pleading in his own way, even though he's been saying, I'm guilty.
Yeah.
There's that, it's all, the way I see it anyway, is that he is testing love and seeing how far he can go against it before love can convince him that he is entitled to be loved and to enter love. And just like a child tearing up his own artwork, he could tear up anything, he could destroy anything, but he's destroying his own. It's the ultimate test of, well, do you care about me? Because if I'm destroying something that is mine, and you still react, then I know you must care about me.
Yeah.
And that's kind of how I've been seeing this.
Yeah.
How far can I go against love until he shows me?
Testing of.
Yeah.
Yes. And that's not even that conscious or deliberate. I mean, it's just something in the chemistry. Well, let's. So we've got anyway to an interesting point. Love is now saying, "I'm not taking your reasons. I'm not accepting your reasons for rejecting me. What you see is not necessarily what is there, and the reason I know that is because your very power of perception is grounded in me, in my consciousness, the ground of being, as I was saying at the beginning.